Hi, this is the AI Storyteller. I'm Mark. This issue's interpretation is about the novel A Room with a View. The author is E. M. Forster, an English writer who is widely recognized as one of the greatest novelists of the 20th century, and was nominated for the Nobel Prize in Literature 13 times. A Room with a View is considered Forster's masterpiece, published in 1908. However, at the time, it did not immediately receive much attention, and even Forster himself didn't give it much importance. One of Forster's biographers said, in early May, when the manuscript of A Room with a View was completed, Forster dismissed it as a pile of waste paper. Of course, this novel is far from being a pile of waste paper. Its lack of attention initially was mainly due to unfortunate timing. After a few years of publication, it gradually gained popularity in the English literary world. People began to recognize its literary value and discuss its writing techniques, characterizations, and themes. They discovered that this seemingly ordinary novel actually possessed rich depth and a unique style, even exhibiting some timeless qualities that transcended its era. Over time, this novel received increasing attention. Forster once told a journalist from the Paris Review that to some extent, he owes his current achievements to A Room with a View. At the time, Forster was already a celebrated writer worldwide and was teaching his own novel course at Cambridge University. The content of these lectures was later compiled and published as a book titled Aspects of the Novel, which remains an essential work for the study of foreign literature. A Room with a View played a crucial role in Forster's career, solidifying his literary style and propelling him from a newcomer to a 20th-century English literary idol, mentioned alongside D.H. Lawrence, James Joyce, and other literary giants. In this interpretation, let's explore what kind of novel A Room with a View truly is. Where do its foresight and uniqueness lie? Why was it overlooked by readers and even the author himself at the time of its publication? How did this neglected novel transform into a recognized British literary classic, shaping Forster's literary style? Part 1. Let's start by briefly exploring Forster's life and the main plot of A Room with a View. From 1879 to 1970, Forster lived to be 91 years old, spanning almost the entire 20th century. His longevity can be largely attributed to his family background. Forster was born into a middle-class British family, with his father being an architect. Although his father passed away when Forster was very young, his life remained stable. This was because his grandmother was a noblewoman who left Forster and his mother an inheritance of around £8,000, a significant sum that allowed them to lead a decent and independent life. Without financial burdens, Forster could enjoy a quality education and pursue writing without worries. He attended Cambridge University, where he decided to become a novelist during his student years. Due to the early loss of his father, Forster had a close relationship with his mother. After graduating from university, he traveled to Italy and Greece multiple times with his mother. Forster's enthusiasm for travel was influenced by the prevailing trend in British society at the time. Young British individuals, after completing their university education, would embark on a journey to explore the European continent and broaden their horizons if their circumstances allowed. Cambridge and Oxford universities were deeply rooted in the love for ancient Greece, which influenced Forster and other writers of his time, such as Byron, Shelley, and Wilde, who were known enthusiasts of Greece. During his travels, the landscapes and cultures of foreign lands had a profound impact on Forster's spirit. In the 3 years following his educational travels, Forster wrote 3 novels at a pace of 1 novel per year, quickly gaining attention in the British literary scene and building his reputation. 2 of these novels were set in Italy, and one of them is the subject of our discussion, A Room with a View. The plot of this novel is clear and straightforward, seemingly easy to summarize in a few words. It tells the story of Lucy, a young upper-class girl, and her cousin Charlotte, who travel together to Florence, Italy, for a vacation during the Victorian era in England. They find themselves disappointed with the location of their rooms in a hotel, which lacks a desirable view. At that moment, a young Englishman named George and his father, also from England, generously offer to exchange their rooms with Lucy and Charlotte. They warmly declare to the 2 ladies they just met, "My father can see the view, and so can I. Lucy and Charlotte, being from a noble background and adhering to social etiquette, find this straightforward kindness both abrupt and awkward. Particularly, Charlotte, Lucy's cousin, believes that George and his father lack proper manners and assumes they come from the British working class. Guided by traditional upper-class societal biases, Charlotte immediately decides to maintain a social distance from them. Although Lucy feels curious about the genuineness and friendliness displayed by George and his father, her upbringing warns her to remain rational. However, the subsequent developments caught Lucy and Charlotte off guard as they continued to encounter George and his father in Italy. Despite Charlotte's resistance and avoidance, the father and son remained oblivious and continued to interact graciously with them. However, Charlotte's anxiety grew. On one hand, she noticed that Lucy had fallen in love with George and that the father and son seemed genuinely good-hearted. On the other hand, she felt that this relationship was illogical. Influenced by the traditional class perceptions and etiquette of British society, she rigidly prevented the development of this cross-cultural romance. The trip quickly came to an end, and Lucy returned to England where, according to her family's arrangement, she became engaged to Cecil, a man with a similar background and an impeccable appearance. However, Lucy soon realized that she could not accept Cecil's polite yet condescending demeanor shaped by upper-class societal training. After facing various obstacles, she decided to defy her family's plans and break off the engagement. In the novel's conclusion, Lucy reunites with George, and in the room with a view where they initially met, they solidify their love for each other. Part 2. Next, let's explore where the foresight and uniqueness of this novel lie. From today's perspective, the character set up in this story is a typical one in British classical literature. The older generation, with good intentions but conservative beliefs, clashes with the next generation, who fearlessly choose their own paths regardless of societal judgment. The story begins with love and ends with love, creating an overall romantic atmosphere. From the perspective of the plot and character setup, A Room with a View doesn't possess particularly remarkable qualities. When this novel was published, the British literary scene was at a peak of breaking away from previous artistic conventions. Prior to this novel, there were works like Thomas Hardy's Tess of the d'Urberville, which openly challenged the moral beliefs of the Victorian upper class, and D.H. Lawrence's shocking novel Sons and Lovers. Compared to those works, A Room with a View may have seemed too quiet. So why do later critics claim that it exhibited foresight? The answer lies in Forster's attitude while writing this book. Although the novel also questions traditional views within British class society, Forster's approach is not as sharp or confrontational as Hardy's or Lawrence's. He straightforwardly points out certain character flaws of the British middle class, such as indifference, stubbornness, cautiousness, lack of imagination, and hypocrisy. He even wrote a book called The Longest Journey to analyze these issues, stating that the British middle class has an undeveloped heart. However, at the same time, he doesn't harbor animosity towards this class and avoids creating tragedies in his novels. In Tess of the d'Urberville, when the protagonist Tess realizes that the wealthy aristocrat Alec d'Urberville has caused her to lose her true love for the second time, she kills him with a knife. In A Room with a View, when facing Charlotte, Lucy's cousin, who consistently adds complications to their love story, Lucy and George strive to understand her to the fullest extent possible. However, Hardy and Lawrence approach the moral beliefs of the older generation in British society with a resolute and decisive attitude that aligned with the mainstream thought of the time. In contrast, Forster appeared slightly hesitant and chose to reconcile the opposing characters in his novel. Interestingly, it was this hesitation that allowed Forster to be ahead of his time. We know that this novel was published in 1908, a time when the mainstream literary circle in Britain was shifting its focus from the upper middle class to a broader audience. It was easy for the public to misunderstand A Room with a View as a romantic novel with exoticism, although it did present some criticism, albeit not strongly enough. It was only with the outbreak of the two world wars that people finally discerned a unique longing in Forster's hesitations. What kind of longing was it? In Forster's own words, it was a longing to connect. After A Room with a View, Forster used the word connect multiple times to emphasize the theme of his literary works. This word later became a key term that scholars were most interested in when studying Forster's literature. What does connect mean? Let's explain it in more detail using the details in the book. As mentioned earlier, the novel is set in Italy, and Forster repeatedly contrasts the lives of the British and the Italians. Although Forster leans towards the Italian way of life, his stance is not one of either-or. We can use a monologue from Lucy in the book to try to explain Forster's stance. Lucy says, "George and I both know it to be the case, but why does it distress him? We know that we come from the winds and will return to the winds, that all of life is perhaps a knot, a tangle, a blemish in the eternal smoothness. So why should we be so unhappy? We might as well love each other, work hard, and enjoy ourselves. I don't believe in worldwide distinctions." Lucy's reference to worldwide distinctions refers to the cultural differences between people of different classes and nationalities. In Forster's view, these distinctions may be inescapable, and the world will not exist with only one fixed cultural perspective. However, one thing remains unchanged. Forster poetically describes through Lucy's inner thoughts that we all come from the winds and will return to the winds. The essence of human life does not change. Forster believes that to resolve the conflicts caused by cultural differences, people need to love each other, work hard, and redirect their attention to returning to their natural essence. Only then can true peace be achieved, which is what Forster refers to as connect. Understanding this concept, and considering the publication and reception background of A Room with a View, we can better comprehend the fate of this book. Historically, A Room with a View was written during the early Edwardian era, but it gained attention during the middle to late period of the Edwardian era. What was Edwardian Britain like? If we had to summarize it in one word, it would be contradictory. Although Britain appeared prosperous and powerful on the surface, it was actually facing internal and external challenges. The outbreak of the First World War in the 1920s severely weakened Britain's power. A series of events, such as international workers' strikes, the women's suffrage movement, and the Irish autonomy movement, left the ancient colonial empire of Britain in decline. Subsequently, in the late 1920s and early 1930s, the entire capitalist society experienced an unprecedented economic crisis. Factories closed, industries slumped, and people struggled on the poverty line. Fascist forces rapidly rose in Germany, Italy, and Japan, and in 1939, the Second World War erupted. In just 50 years, humanity experienced 2 world wars, with mutual slaughter, the manifestation of human sins, and the despair and terror of war. This brought about unprecedented intellectual chaos and a strong sense of turbulent times. The British people generally felt that the short reign of King Edward would be the requiem of the British Empire. Influenced by these circumstances, British literary creators began to search for new themes and experiment with new forms. Thus emerged a tendency that was detached from, or even opposed to, the tradition of realism. Forster's hesitation, as we mentioned earlier, made his works not fit into any particular literary trend of the Edwardian era. However, the core theme of connection in his works seemed to fulfill the desires of people during that period. That is, division and conflict cannot truly bring happiness. Only peace can create new possibilities as much as possible. During wartime, the literary community collectively referred to novels that called for peace by certain authors as anti-war literature. Examples include Stefan Zweig, Romain Rolland during World War I, and Erich Maria Remarque and Günter Grass during World War II. The literary styles of these authors may have been quite different from Forster's, but if we look at the essence of their expressed desires, Forster shares a similarity with them in artistic thought. They all hope to awaken the innate goodness of the masses through literature and embrace peace. Following this line of thought, the theme of A Room with a View becomes universal. People from different classes and different nations can establish connections based on love and human nature, even if their beliefs and lifestyles are vastly different. For literary enthusiasts of that era, such a call for connection and peace indeed brought great comfort. It can be said that Forster used an ancient virtue to console the contemporary calamities. Since the theme of A Room with a View is universal, is it a conservative novel? The answer is no. This novel has another characteristic, a distinct feminist ideology. Some contemporary critics have noticed that Forster emphasizes the differences between social classes in British society in this novel. However, readers often find similarities between the character portrayals in A Room with a View and many feminist novels of later eras. The most obvious representative character is Lucy's fiancé, Cecil. He is a typical spokesperson for a patriarchal society. Born into the middle class, educated and wealthy, he rigidly adheres to outdated social norms, even to the point of absurdity. When interacting with Lucy, Cecil always emphasizes love and self-righteously describes it as a bestowed favor. He consistently imagines Lucy as a medieval lady, waiting for him as a medieval knight to protect her. The novel contains a passage that says, "For the only relationship which Cecil conceived was feudal, the protection of his little territory, and the pleasing of his suzerain." Superficially, Cecil's behavior aligns with the natural expression of gentlemanly manners in British traditional culture. However, in the interpretation of the feminist era, he is seen as questioning and denying Lucy, negating her autonomy and ability to lead an independent life. Cecil's viewpoint implies that women are incapable and easily harmed, which is often used as an excuse by some men to consolidate their own social dominance. As the weaker character, Lucy is depicted as needing Cecil, who possesses masculine qualities, to protect her. However, in reality, this ambitious and supposedly protective Cecil becomes unnatural and continuously looks around anxiously, fearing that someone might see them while they are kissing. The inconsistency and weakness of his patriarchal mindset can be seen in many details of the novel. Therefore, A Room with a View has always resonated widely among female readers, and the text of the novel is often regarded as a case study in feminist literature. Part 3. Let's continue discussing how A Room with a View established Forster's writing style, and why it played a transitional role in his work. Although Forster lived a long life, he didn't produce many literary works. Starting with his first novel, Where Angels Fear to Tread, published in 1905, and concluding with his last full-length novel, A Passage to India, in 1924, he only wrote 6 novels. In the remaining 46 years of his life, Forster focused on writing short stories and essays, without any other major literary works. A Room with a View is Forster's second full-length novel, and the themes of exoticism, contrasting moral values between social classes, and clashes of different cultural backgrounds, as mentioned earlier, became the main characteristics of his literary works, frequently appearing in his writing. Forster's unique writing technique is also fully demonstrated in this novel. He emphasizes the portrayal of details without falling into triviality. His writing rarely contains typical lengthy English sentences. Instead, he focuses on narrative accuracy and explores the character's subconscious. This approach, which delves deep while remaining accessible, may have appeared somewhat immature in his first novel, Where Angels Fear to Tread, but in A Room with a View, he demonstrates mastery of this writing technique. Let's provide an example from the book. After Lucy returns from Italy to England, she visits Cecil's mother, Mrs. Vyse, with Cecil. At this point, Lucy already has feelings for someone else, and since Cecil and his mother are entirely different from her, it is bound to be a rather complicated encounter. Both Cecil and his mother are extremely satisfied with Lucy, viewing her as an ideal daughter-in-law, and they even discuss the wedding and the couple's plans after marriage. However, Lucy remains absent-minded and constantly thinks about George. That night, Lucy stays in the room next to Mrs. Vyse. Before falling asleep, Mrs. Vyse is still immersed in her satisfaction with Lucy, and she happily says to her son, "Let her be one of our family." However, reality is not as beautiful as Mrs. Vyse imagines. Just as she is about to doze off, a piercing scream is heard from Lucy's room. In England, in families like Cecil's, if there is something wrong with Lucy, Mrs. Vyse could easily ring for the maid. However, Forster doesn't write it that way. Instead, he has the attentive Mrs. Vyse personally go to Lucy's room, making her appear more kind and considerate. When Mrs. Vyse walks into the adjacent room, she finds Lucy sitting upright on the bed, with one hand covering her cheek. Through Mrs. Vyse's actions, Forster leads the reader to believe that Lucy had a nightmare. It is only after Mrs. Weiss leaves and Lucy returns to bed to continue her sleep that Forster uses a brief sentence to inform us that Lucy had just dreamt of George. Moreover, intriguingly, throughout the entire process, Cecil doesn't appear. He sleeps deeply and doesn't even hear Lucy's scream. Forster depicts Lucy's scream in a casual manner, yet it allows readers to feel her panic and Mrs. Weiss's oblivious satisfaction. At the same time, it highlights Cecil's awkwardness, ignorance, and pitifulness. In the conclusion of this passage, Forster continues to provide a brief glimpse of Cecil using very concise strokes. He first emphasizes that Cecil's snoring has not stopped, and then shifts the perspective, informing the readers that he slept heavily, darkness covering the whole flat. This sentence contains both irony and sympathy, making it thought-provoking. This entire process, which spans just 2 short pages in the book, contains almost no direct descriptions, yet its impact is stronger than if it had been portrayed directly. Forster conveys the awkward situations of the 3 characters, where their perceptions of each other sharply contrast with the reality. It could have been written as a strong conflict, but Forster chooses a restrained and implicit approach to express it, leaving much unsaid. It is no wonder that critics often say there is hardly a character in a room with a view that readers dislike. This is actually due to Forster's strong empathy, his precise grasp of emotions, and his subtle techniques of characterization. Furthermore, A Room with a View also establishes Forster's aesthetic style. This style is first reflected in the novel's chapter arrangement. Forster likes to divide the novel into multiple chapters, with each chapter being similar in length to a short story. Additionally, he gives each chapter a title. These titles are not only beautiful but also accurately indicate the core content of each chapter. For example, when Lucy and George go on their first outing, Forster titles this chapter as Various Things Which Happen on a Pleasant Outing. In a light-hearted and elegant manner, he illustrates that people from different social classes can coexist within this theme. Another example is the chapter where Lucy returns to England and becomes engaged to Cecil. Forster titles this chapter as Lucy as a Work of Art, hinting at Lucy's true position in Cecil's mind. Each small chapter of this novel can be regarded as a complete short story, with titles, forms, and rhythms, resembling a series of landscapes appearing one after another in front of small windows, providing enjoyment for readers. Forster's aesthetic style is also reflected in the language of the novel, which is concise and emphasizes a poetic rhythm. Regardless of the era, Forster's elegant language has always been highly regarded. American literary critic Lionel Trilling even said Forster is the only living novelist with whom one can read over and over again. Each reading gives me a sense of something being learned. Few other writers give us that sensation. In the 1980s, A Room with a View was adapted into a film, and for a period of time, young people enjoyed reciting the concise, clean, and rhythmic sentences from the original book. Forster was skilled at creating a linguistic atmosphere to enhance, symbolize, and shape the characters and their destinies. He would never easily draw a conclusion for a plot. Instead, he preferred to use indirect means of portrayal, leaving ample space for readers' imagination, much like an impressionist painting. For example, at the end of the novel, when Lucy and George reunite in Italy and decide to be together, Forster writes, "Youth enwrapped them. The song of Phaeton announced passion requited, love attained." But they felt the love more sacred than this. They had reached it through time, they had come to it alone, and Providence had guided them. Gradually, the song faded away, and they heard the rushing of water as the river carried away the accumulated snow of winter into the Mediterranean. With this, the essence of A Room with a View has been interpreted for you. One crucial reason why this seemingly simple novel has become a recognized classic of British literature is that it consistently provides readers with broad imaginative and interpretative space. Since its publication, interpretations of the book have never ceased. For example, at the end of the 20th century, due to the success of its film adaptation, A Room with a View returned to the public eye once again. At that time, consumerism was prevalent worldwide, and as a result, there were voices questioning Lucy. Could she truly give up her accustomed middle-class life? Could she remain happy in Italy, free from the comforts and privileges of her previous life? Over 100 years ago, Forster, filled with idealistic aspirations, sought to use the allure of art and exotic landscapes to dispel the shadows cast by class differences on this love story. However, readers over 100 years later found themselves doubting whether the protagonist's choices were merely Forster's wishful thinking. It's difficult for modern readers to believe that the characters in the novel would make such choices, as people quickly recognize the importance of practical life and often prioritize rational values. People are skeptical of Lucy's courageous decision being genuine, yet paradoxically, the public still greatly enjoys such stories. If Forster were still alive to witness the world over 100 years later and see this contradictory phenomenon of readers not believing yet enjoying it, one can only wonder what his reaction would be. However, in the 1950s, he actually continued the story of A Room with a View. In the new edition of the novel, he added an article called A View Without a Room at the end, where he and readers playfully imagined the future lives of the characters from the book. In today's terms, one could consider it a fanfiction piece written by Forster himself. What happened to George and Lucy in the end? Forster tells us that during the turbulent decades, George enlisted in the military and discovered a fondness for warfare. On the battlefield, far away from his wife, he couldn't remain faithful and had an affair. Meanwhile, Lucy became a piano teacher. Although their shared residence was destroyed in an air raid, she remained resilient. In the end, George returned to Florence, the city where they first fell in love, during a battle in Italy. He attempted to find the hotel where they had first met, but things had changed, and he was disappointed. Nevertheless, he told Lucy that the views they had witnessed together still remained. Forster's imagination in this regard carries strong irony. From it, we can perceive his attitude towards this love story, which resides between worldliness and naivety, mirroring his attitude towards the world as a whole. He sees through its cruelty, but still maintains hope for connection, believing that any efforts to connect are valuable and leave a profound imprint. Well, that concludes the content for this episode. If you enjoyed my video, please click like, subscribe to my channel, and share it with your friends. Thank you.